On a quiet stretch of the Wyoming plains, where sunsets painted the sky in gold and crimson, she thought she had met just another drifter cowboy. His boots were worn, his coat frayed, and the little boy trailing behind him carried nothing more than a battered sketchbook. To her, he was a man with no roots, a single dad chasing odd jobs, living from one dusty town to the next. But fate had a way of turning first impressions upside down. Behind the weathered hat and guarded silence hid a truth far greater than she could have imagined. He wasn't drifting at all, and his life held secrets of both staggering wealth and years of loneliness. What she didn't know was that meeting him would change not just her perception, but the course of her own heart. The late afternoon sun spilled across the high plains of Wyoming, casting the diner in a honeyed glow. A neon sign buzzed faintly over the door, half broken but still announcing home cookin'. Inside, the smell of coffee lingered, strong and bitter, masking the faint grease of bacon cooked hours ago. Rachel Turner, 38, sat by the window nursing a cup she barely touched. She wasn't from here. Her clothes, her neatly pressed jacket, the guarded way she held herself all gave her away. She had fled her city life for a while, carrying scars of a divorce that had stripped her trust bare. The bell over the door jingled. A man stepped in, tall and broad-shouldered, his boots worn, his coat patched at the elbows. His hat shaded a face roughened by sun and wind, the kind of face that looked carved from stone. Behind him trailed a boy no older than 8, clutching a battered sketchbook. The boy slid into a booth with quiet obedience, flipping open the book, pencil already in hand. Rachel watched without meaning to. There was something magnetic about the pair, lonely, but not lost, quiet yet deeply present. The man ordered 2 plates of chili without looking at the menu. His voice was low, almost gravelly, the kind that spoke more in actions than words. Rachel caught herself staring. She thought she had him figured out already, just another drifter cowboy passing through, raising his son on handouts and day wages, always moving, never settling. She had seen men like him before, charming for a night, gone by morning, incapable of stability. That was the story she told herself anyway, and it was easier to believe than to imagine something deeper. The boy's pencil rolled off the table and clattered near her feet. Rachel bent down, picked it up, and her eyes caught the open page of the sketchbook. Her breath stalled. Drawn in careful lines was a horse galloping across a vast meadow, but in the corner stood a woman's figure, faint, unfinished, and ghost-like. The boy looked at her with solemn eyes, too old for his age. "Thanks, ma'am," he said politely, taking the pencil back. Rachel smiled, but her chest tightened. There was a story here, something aching behind that ghostly figure. The cowboy Jack Callahan, though she didn't know his name, yet nodded a brief thanks. His manner was polite, almost distant, as if he carried a wall around himself. Rachel's instincts bristled. Men who built walls usually had something to hide. She returned to her coffee, trying to push away the strange pull she felt. As the evening deepened, a storm rolled across the plains, raindrops tapping against the diner's glass. Jack shifted, clearly ready to head out, but the boy leaned close and whispered something. Jack sighed, pulled a few crumpled bills from his pocket, and laid them on the counter. Rachel couldn't help noticing how worn the money looked, how carefully he counted it. It only reinforced her assumption: drifter, broke, scraping by. When they finally stepped out, Rachel lingered by the window, watching them cross to an old pickup truck that had more rust than paint. Jack lifted the boy gently into the cab before circling around to the driver's seat. For a moment, his hand rested on the roof of the truck, head bowed, as if the weight of the whole world pressed down on him. Then he straightened, jaw tight, and drove off into the storm. Rachel sat back, unsettled. She had come here to escape, not to get tangled in anyone else's mess. And yet something about the man and his boy clung to her thoughts like burrs on denim. Maybe it was the way the boy's sketches carried grief in every line. Maybe it was the way the father's silence seemed to guard not just himself, but the child too. She told herself it didn't matter. He was just a drifter cowboy, a single dad chasing odd jobs, nothing to do with her life. Still, as the rain fell harder outside, Rachel realized she hadn't even tasted her coffee. That night, back at the small rental cabin on the edge of town, she lay awake listening to the storm. Her mind kept circling back to the boy's sketchbook, that half-finished figure on the page. She remembered the man's bowed head by the truck. Against her will, curiosity stirred, followed by a faint, unwelcome warmth in her chest. She shook it off, telling herself she was only projecting. She had been burned before, she wouldn't be foolish again. And yet, deep down, she knew this wasn't the end of it. Fate had a way of weaving threads where she least expected. The cowboy and his son were not done crossing her path. The storm passed by dawn, leaving the Wyoming air sharp and clean, the sky an endless sheet of pale blue. Rachel decided to stop by the farmer's market in town that Saturday, needing something fresh to cook, needing distraction from the thoughts that kept circling her. She didn't expect to see them again. Yet there he was, Jack Callahan, with his son by his side, carrying crates of apples and jars of honey with the ease of a man used to hard labor. People greeted him with nods, some with warm familiarity. He answered with quiet politeness but never lingered. The boy darted off to a nearby stand, his sketchbook under his arm, leaving Jack to load his truck alone. Rachel found herself studying him from behind the safety of a produce stand. Something didn't match the story she had written in her mind. Drifters didn't get greeted like neighbors. They didn't carry themselves with such rooted steadiness, as though the land itself knew them. Still, she told herself not to look too deeply. Curiosity was dangerous. She focused on a basket of peaches, only to hear the boy's voice beside her. "You like drawings, ma'am?" he asked shyly, holding out his sketchbook. Rachel hesitated before nodding. The boy, Ethan, she learned had flipped open to a fresh page. There was a detailed sketch of the diner from last night. The neon sign captured exactly, with two figures drawn in the window, Rachel herself and his father, sitting at different booths but somehow linked by the angle of the light. Her chest tightened. "You're very talented," she said softly. The boy smiled, proud, then was called back by his father. Jack tipped his hat to her in brief acknowledgement, his eyes unreadable. Rachel offered a polite smile, but her heart was already unsteady. There was weight in his silence, a story he wasn't telling. She left the market unsettled. That evening, fate forced them together again. Rachel's rental car sputtered and died on the dirt road outside town. She cursed under her breath, alone on the empty stretch, when headlights approached. The old pickup pulled over, and Jack stepped out. "Looks like your alternator gave out," he said after a glance beneath the hood. His voice was calm, matter-of-fact. Without asking permission, he set to work, his hands moving with practiced precision. The boy held a flashlight, eager to help. Within minutes, the engine coughed back to life. Rachel insisted on paying him. Jack shook his head. "Just get yourself home safe." There was a softness in his tone then, fleeting but undeniable. She drove away, but the image of father and son standing in the glow of headlights stayed with her. Days passed, and their paths kept crossing at the diner, at the market, at the tiny library where Ethan pored over art books. Each time, Rachel saw more layers. Jack lifting his boy into the saddle with gentle strength. Jack fixing a neighbor's fence without pay. Jack kneeling in the church pew with his hat pressed to his chest. He wasn't a drifter at all. He was rooted here, part of this land, though he lived like a shadow among his own people. The truth came crashing in one evening when Rachel overheard two ranch hands talking outside the general store. "Mr. Callahan's refusing the developers again," one said. "He owns near half the state and still lives like a hermit. Shame after what happened to his wife." Rachel froze. Half the state. Wealth beyond imagination. The man she thought was scraping pennies together had more than anyone she had ever known. And his wife gone? The sketchbook pages, the ghost-like figure, The silence all clicked into place. He wasn't a drifter because he was broke. He was drifting because grief had anchored him nowhere. Later, when she saw him at the edge of town, gazing out at the horizon while Ethan sketched nearby, Rachel's heart pounded with a mix of awe and confusion. She approached carefully. "Why let people think you're just passing through?" she asked, her voice quiet. Jack turned to her, his eyes shadowed but steady. "Because money can't bring back what I lost. And I haven't had a reason to let anyone close since." His gaze flicked briefly to his son, then back to her. "Wealth is nothing without someone to share it with." Rachel didn't know what to say. All her assumptions had crumbled. She had come here running from her own wounds, only to find a man whose scars were deeper, heavier. And yet, she felt the first fragile thread of connection tugging at her heart. It terrified her as much as it drew her closer. That night, she couldn't sleep. The image of Jack standing against the vast Wyoming sky, a man who had everything and nothing at once, stayed with her. She realized she no longer saw a drifter cowboy. She saw a father, a man carrying grief, a soul as restless and wounded as her own. And for the first time in years, Rachel wondered if healing was possible for both of them. Summer edged toward fall, and the Wyoming nights grew cooler. Rachel found herself spending more time at the ranch on the outskirts of town. Jack's ranch, though he never called it that. To him it was just land, fences to mend, horses to tend, cattle to move. To Ethan it was a playground of wide pastures and open skies. For Rachel, it became a place where the walls she had built around her heart began to crack. She saw Jack differently now. He wasn't just the silent cowboy who had once looked like a drifter. He was a father who tied his son's boots with care, a man who still carried the memory of a wife gone too soon, and someone who, despite his wealth, chose to live simply, almost humbly. But with the growing closeness came fear. One evening, as she helped Ethan collect sketches scattered by the wind, she whispered, "Your dad. He's different than I thought." Ethan looked up at her with steady eyes far older than his years. "He's lonely, ma'am. He won't say it, but he is. I just want him to smile again." The boy's words lodged deep in her chest. The turning point came on a late September afternoon. Ethan was riding his horse near the ridge while Rachel and Jack repaired a fence. A sudden clap of thunder startled the horse, sending Ethan tumbling onto the rocky ground. Rachel's heart lurched as she and Jack ran. Jack reached his son first, dropping to his knees, hands trembling as he checked for broken bones. Ethan whimpered but clung to his father's shirt. Rachel knelt beside them, brushing dirt from the boy's forehead. "He's okay," she said gently. "Shaken, but okay." Jack's shoulders sagged with relief, but his face was pale, lined with fear. That night, as Ethan slept safe in bed, Jack lingered on the porch. Rachel joined him, the night sky stretched infinite above. He stared out at the dark horizon, voice low and raw. "When my wife died, I promised myself I wouldn't let anyone else in. I thought if I kept my heart locked up, I'd never feel that kind of pain again. But today, seeing Ethan fall, it broke me all over. I realized keeping myself shut down doesn't protect him. It just leaves us both lonelier." He turned toward her, eyes unguarded for the first time. "Rachel, I don't know how to do this. I have wealth, land, everything a man could want. But none of it matters if I can't give my boy a real home, or if I can't find the courage to let someone love me again." Rachel's throat tightened. Her own past rose up. Nights spent alone after her divorce, the echo of betrayal, the ache of trying to rebuild. She laid a hand on his arm. "You don't have to have all the answers. Sometimes, healing doesn't come from being strong. It comes from being willing to be seen. And Jack, I see you. Not the landowner, not the cowboy, you." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the chorus of crickets. Then Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out Ethan's sketchbook, which the boy had left on the porch earlier. He flipped to a page and handed it to her. Drawn in delicate pencil was a family of 3, the boy in the middle, holding hands with his father and a woman whose face was unmistakably Rachel's. Her breath caught. "He drew this weeks ago," Jack said softly. Before I could even admit to myself what I was feeling, tears stung Rachel's eyes. In that moment, the fear that had kept her heart barricaded loosened. She realized this wasn't about stepping into someone else's wealth or status. It was about answering the need of a boy for a mother figure, and the unspoken longing of a man who had been loveless for too long. As the days shortened and the first frost came, change settled gently over them. Rachel stayed, helping with chores, cooking meals, reading to Ethan by the fire. Jack's laughter returned in fragments, tentative but real. The three of them began to weave a rhythm that felt like family, not forced, not pretended, but born of trust and slow healing. One evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, Jack took Rachel's hand and guided her to the porch where Ethan was chasing fireflies. "I can't promise the road ahead will be easy," he said. "But I can promise you won't walk it alone." "Not anymore." His voice broke slightly. "You've given me back something I thought I'd lost forever." Rachel squeezed his hand, heart steady for the first time in years. "And you've shown me that even after everything, love can grow again." Together, they stood watching Ethan dart across the yard, his laughter carrying into the twilight. The wide Wyoming sky blazed with the last colors of day, a horizon painted in gold and crimson. Jack slipped his arm around Rachel's shoulders, pulling her close. For the first time, the cowboy who had owned half the state but lived without love felt whole again, not because of wealth or land, but because, at last, his heart had found its home. In the end, what began as a fleeting encounter with a quiet cowboy became a story of healing, trust, and second chances. She discovered that true wealth is not measured by land or money, but by the courage to love again and the warmth of family by your side. His years of silence gave way to laughter, her guarded heart opened to belonging, and together they built something more enduring than fortune, a home. Their journey reminds us that even in the loneliest seasons, love can find its way back when we dare to believe. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs hope today. And don't forget to subscribe for more soul-stirring tales that celebrate resilience, family, and the power of love.